I still remember the moment when I told my family I was pregnant. The shock, the disappointment, the judgment, it was as if I had just told them I was about to commit the worst crime imaginable. I was alone, not just physically but emotionally, and there was no one there to offer support. The person I thought would be my biggest ally, my mother, looked at me with cold eyes. "This is your mistake," she said. "You'll have to handle it yourself." No one wanted to help, no one wanted to understand. I remember the pain, the humiliation, the feeling of being discarded by the people I had trusted the most. They thought I was foolish for making a choice that didn't align with their expectations of what my life should look like. I was cast out, not literally but emotionally, and I didn't know where to turn. But here's the twist: I didn't break. I didn't crumble under the weight of their rejection. I looked at the empty space around me and I realized something crucial. I wasn't going to let this define me. I wasn't going to let their refusal to help crush my spirit. In fact, that moment marked the beginning of something bigger, something that would not only change my life but would ultimately change their perspective on me forever. And the most astonishing part: 10 years later, when my son stood before a room full of people at his graduation, giving a speech that would leave everyone in tears, it was my family, the same people who turned their backs on me, who couldn't hold back their emotions. The same family who thought I was incapable, the same family who doubted me, were now witnessing the consequences of their actions. But how did we get here? How did a single mother who was abandoned by her family go from a place of despair to raising a son who would become the pride of a community? I want to take you on that journey. Let me show you the steps I took, the battles I fought, and the way I turned what seemed like a hopeless situation into a triumph that no one, not even my family, could deny. This is where the story starts. This is where it gets personal. This is where everything changes. Stay with me. The journey is about to unfold and you're not going to want to miss what happens next. Why would my family, who once rejected me, be so moved by my son's success? What was the turning point? How did I go from being an outcast to becoming a mother they could never forget? Keep watching, because the answer might surprise you. It wasn't just the words, the looks, or the judgments that hurt the most. It was the actions. I'll never forget the feeling of being completely alone, not only pregnant but isolated in a world that seemed to be moving forward while I was stuck in place. I thought that if anyone could understand, it would be my family. After all, we were supposed to stick together, right? But as soon as I told them, it was clear that my situation was seen as a shame, something that would bring nothing but embarrassment. My mother was the first to speak, and her words were like daggers. "This is your fault, not mine. I won't be helping you raise this child. You've made your bed, now lie in it." It wasn't the first time my mother had shown this side of herself. She'd always been cold, always pushed us to be perfect, to live up to the impossible standards she set. But that moment, that rejection, it wasn't just a one-time thing. It was who she was, who she had always been. My father was no better. He didn't say anything at first, but the silence spoke volumes. He looked at me as if I had betrayed him, as if this pregnancy was the worst thing I could have done to my family. He didn't even try to hide his disappointment. It was as if I had committed the unforgivable sin. In his eyes, I had ruined my future. How could I possibly raise a child on my own? His eyes seemed to say it all: "I have no faith in you." And then there were my siblings. Some of them turned their backs outright, refusing to speak to me. They had their own lives to live, and I was just a burden to them now. The others. They stood in the background, offering nothing but a quiet, passive dismissal. None of them were willing to help. None of them were willing to offer a single word of comfort. It was as if, overnight, I had become a stranger in my own family. But it wasn't just about them being cold. They didn't just say no, they made sure I knew I was on my own. There were no offers of help with anything, no discussions about what the future would hold. Not even a gesture of understanding. I found myself at the mercy of their judgments. I couldn't show weakness. I couldn't express how deeply I felt their rejection. I had to toughen up. I had no other choice. I couldn't rely on them. There was one moment that stood out. The day I needed help, the day I went to my mother's house to ask for support. I was exhausted. I had nowhere else to go, and I thought maybe, just maybe, this time she would relent. Maybe this time she would understand that I was scared, that I was trying my best, that I wasn't looking for pity, just a little help. I remember the feeling of dread in the pit of my stomach as I walked up to her door. When she opened it, there was no sympathy in her eyes. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice sharp. I swallowed hard, feeling the tears well up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I didn't want to seem weak. I didn't want her to see that I was struggling. "I just need your help, I don't know how to do this on my own." She didn't even hesitate. "I'm not going to help you. You made this choice, and now you have to deal with the consequences." And just like that, I was turned away. I stood there in the doorway, feeling like the smallest person in the world, and yet at that moment something inside me snapped. It was as if all the pain, all the rejection, all the doubts that had been pushed onto me for so long started to boil over. I realized that I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their help. I didn't need anyone to tell me that I wasn't enough. I had to do this on my own. But here's the thing, they didn't understand who I was. They didn't understand what they had just done. They underestimated me. They thought that their words and their rejection would break me, but what they didn't see was that it fueled something inside me. I had a fire in me now, a fire that would drive me through the next 10 years. Every time I was told I couldn't do it, every time I was looked down upon, I used it. I didn't break. I didn't let their words define me. I turned their rejection into determination. But they didn't know that yet. They didn't know what was coming. They didn't realize that as they dismissed me, I was building something. I was making plans. I wasn't just going to prove them wrong, I was going to make them regret ever doubting me. How did I get from that moment to standing at my son's graduation ceremony, watching him speak so powerfully that it moved even the hardest of hearts? How did I go from being an outcast in my own family to raising a son that my family couldn't ignore? The answer was simple: I never gave up. I kept going even when everyone else had written me off. I kept pushing, kept building, and when the time was right, I made sure they knew just how wrong they were about me. There are moments in life where everything changes in an instant. When I found out I was pregnant, I knew things wouldn't be easy. But what I didn't realize was how deeply it would hurt to feel rejected by the very people who were supposed to have my back. My family's cold response was like a slap to the face. At that moment, I felt like the world was crumbling beneath me, but I wasn't about to let it define me. I wasn't going to let their rejection be my end. It would be my beginning. It took me a while to realize that the pain I was feeling wasn't just from the words they said or the looks they gave me. It was from their failure to see me as more than a mistake. But that failure wasn't mine to carry, it was theirs. They didn't see what I could become. They didn't see what I would accomplish. And that's when the seed of my plan began to take root. I didn't need them to validate me. I didn't need their approval. What I needed was to focus on my own strength and move forward. I had to figure out how to make it on my own, how to raise my child without relying on anyone but myself. And that's exactly what I did. I started to build my own life brick by brick. I was determined to make sure that my child would never feel the sting of rejection that I had felt. Every decision I made from that moment on was with one thing in mind: my son's future. I wasn't just going to survive this, I was going to thrive. But I also knew that success wouldn't come easily. I needed a plan. And that's when I began thinking long-term. I enrolled in courses, picked up new skills, and worked multiple jobs to ensure that I could provide for my child. There were days when I barely had time to breathe, but I kept going. The nights were long, the work exhausting, but I refused to give up. And as time passed, I saw the fruits of my labor. I was building a future, not just for myself, but for my son. He was going to have everything I never had. A mother who fought for him, who built a life for him from nothing. I was determined to make sure that my son would never know what it felt like to be looked down upon. If that revenge hit just right, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more epic comebacks and justice-served stories. Drop a comment below, I'd love to know what you would have done in their place. But here's the part that no one saw coming, the secret plan I had been quietly working on all along. It wasn't just about surviving, about getting by. It wasn't just about doing my best. It was about proving something, proving to my family, to everyone who had ever doubted me, that I was more than they thought I was. That I was capable of greatness, and I was going to make sure they saw it. I didn't tell anyone about the plan, I didn't need to. They had written me off already. No one cared enough to know what I was working on, and that was exactly how I wanted it. I wasn't going to make the mistake of seeking validation from people who had already shown me that they didn't believe in me. The plan was mine, and mine alone. I would execute it in silence, and when the time came, everyone would see the results. It was going to be my greatest revenge, but it wasn't about getting back at them. It was about showing them that they were wrong. And as I watched my son grow, as he learned, as he developed, I began to see the fruits of my labor. He was bright, compassionate, and strong, everything I had worked so hard to give him. And even though my family wasn't a part of that journey, There was a part of me that knew they would eventually have to confront the reality of what I had done. They would have to reckon with the fact that, while they had turned their backs on me, I had turned my life around. And when the time came, they would see just how wrong they were. I kept working, kept pushing, and kept building. Every step I took was with one goal in mind: to make sure that my son would have everything I never had and more. I wanted him to know that he was loved, that he was worth fighting for. But I also wanted him to know something else: that nothing in life comes easy, and if you want something, you have to work for it. And as I worked, as I kept moving forward, I started to see the bigger picture. I realized that the journey I was on wasn't just about proving something to my family, it was about proving something to myself. I was capable of so much more than I had ever given myself credit for. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. And as I looked at my son, I knew that all of my hard work was worth it. But this was just the beginning. There was more to the plan. There was more I needed to do to make sure that my son's future was secure, and that everything I had worked for wasn't in vain. But it wasn't just about making sure he had a good education or a roof over his head. It was about giving him the tools to succeed in life, the tools to face whatever challenges came his way. And that's when the idea hit me, an idea that would take my plan to the next level. It wasn't just about raising him on my own anymore. It was about ensuring that he would be able to stand on his own 2 feet, that he would have the confidence to face the world and succeed, no matter what. So I took another step towards the future. Another step towards making sure my son had everything he needed to succeed. And little did I know, this step would eventually lead to the moment that would change everything, the moment that would force my family to see me in a completely different light. But for now, I kept working, I kept pushing, I kept moving forward quietly with purpose, with the belief that one day it would all pay off. And that's when everything started to shift. The moment was coming. And when it came, my family would finally understand what they had overlooked all these years. How did I go from being alone, rejected by my family, to standing on the stage at my son's graduation, watching him give a speech that moved everyone to tears? How did I go from being discarded to being the proud mother of a young man who was destined for greatness? The answer is simple: I never stopped believing in myself. For the longest time, I had done everything on my own. It was a lonely, exhausting journey, but I refused to give up. Every day I worked harder, pushed myself further. Every night I would lie awake, thinking of the future I was building for my son. I knew that one day the world would see what I had achieved, but more importantly, I knew that my family would have to reckon with the fact that they had written me off. The thought of that moment kept me going, kept me fueled with the fire I needed to push through. But then, something unexpected happened. I had been quietly working on my career, on my personal growth, and on providing a future for my son when I received an opportunity that would change everything. It came in the form of an unexpected invitation, a family gathering. At first, I was hesitant. My family and I hadn't spoken in years, not since they rejected me. They had made it clear that they didn't want to be part of my life, and I was more than okay with that. But this invitation, it was a chance to show them just how much I had grown, how far I had come. It was an opportunity to show them that I wasn't the person they thought I was. The invitation wasn't just for a casual dinner. It was for a family event where everyone was expected to bring something to the table. They wanted me to come, to join them, but I knew I wasn't just going to show up empty-handed. This wasn't just about reconnecting. This was about making a statement. This was about letting them see the woman I had become, the mother I had become, and most importantly, the success I had built on my own. I made sure that everything about this meeting would send a message. I didn't just want to prove that I was capable. I wanted to show them the strength I had carried with me all these years, the resolve I had built from their rejection. I wasn't there to ask for their forgiveness. I wasn't there to beg for their acceptance. I was there to show them that I had succeeded, with or without their help. And I was going to do it in the most unforgettable way possible. I arrived at the gathering with my son by my side, and the moment we walked in, I could feel the tension. The awkwardness in the air was palpable. My family's eyes widened in surprise, and I knew that they didn't expect to see me looking the way I did, strong, confident, and proud. I wasn't the broken woman they had left behind all those years ago. I wasn't the woman they had turned away. I had become someone entirely new, someone they would have to respect. They tried to act like nothing had changed. They smiled, made small talk, but I could see the discomfort in their eyes. They were trying to pretend that everything was fine, but I could tell that they were rattled. They hadn't expected me to show up as the person I had become. And my son, standing next to me, radiated the confidence and intelligence that only someone who had been raised in an environment of love and strength could possess. He was the proof of everything I had worked for, the tangible result of my dedication, my sacrifices, and my resilience. We sat down at the table, and as the evening progressed, I could see my family's discomfort turning into a quiet realization. My son was well-mannered, well-spoken, and intelligent. He had a natural charm that made everyone take notice. And as the night wore on, I realized that they weren't just noticing him, they were noticing me. They were seeing the woman who had come from nothing, who had been discarded, and yet here I was, thriving, raising a child who was destined for greatness. It was during the meal, after some light conversation, that the moment I had been waiting for came. My son, who had been quiet until then, stood up. I saw him glance at me, a slight smile on his face. He was about to speak, and I knew that this was the moment that would change everything. "I just wanted to say something," he said, his voice calm but filled with a quiet confidence. "I know we don't always get along, and I know there's been a lot of tension in this family, but I want to say thank you to my mom. She's the one who taught me what it means to work hard, to never give up, and to always stand up for myself. She's the one who gave me everything I needed to succeed. And because of her, I'm here today, ready to graduate, ready to take on the world." The room fell silent. For a moment, I thought I had imagined the weight of his words, but when I looked around, I saw it, the tears in my family's eyes. They were shocked, they were moved, and they were deeply affected by the words my son had just spoken. The same family that had rejected me, the same family that had turned their backs, now had to face the reality of what I had accomplished. My son's success wasn't just my victory, it was our victory. And it was their reminder of the mistake they had made when they turned their backs on me. I could see the guilt and regret in their eyes as my son's words hung in the air. They knew, deep down, that they had missed something important. They had missed the strength I had carried all these years. They had missed the fact that, despite their rejection, I had built something powerful, something meaningful. And my son, standing before them, was the proof that I had done it on my own. There was no more denying it. There was no more pretending that I hadn't succeeded. My family had watched me struggle, had seen me rise from the ashes of their abandonment, and now they had no choice but to acknowledge the truth. I had turned my pain into something beautiful. And as the evening drew to a close, I knew that my revenge wasn't about making them feel bad. It was about making them realize just how wrong they had been. They had underestimated me, they had rejected me, but in the end, I had shown them the power of resilience. I had shown them the power of a mother's love and the unbreakable bond between us. And as I looked at my son, who stood taller that night, stronger, prouder, I knew that our story wasn't over yet. It was only just beginning. The night of the family gathering was one of those rare moments in life where everything seemed to come full circle. My son's speech had left an undeniable mark on everyone, especially my family. But while their shock and regret were evident, I knew that this was just the beginning. The feeling of victory was intoxicating, but there was something deeper, something more concrete that I had been working toward for years. I had built my life. I had created a future for my son. But I still had unfinished business with my family, especially with my mother and father. They hadn't just rejected me, they had torn down everything I believed in, making me question my worth. They had judged me, left me to struggle alone, and at the time I thought that was the end of the story. But I had been planning. I had been building something greater, something that would change not just their perceptions but the course of our relationship forever. The turning point came one day when I was reviewing my legal documents, something I did regularly to ensure everything was in order. That's when I stumbled upon a loophole, a chance to take legal action, to make sure my family understood the consequences of their actions. It wasn't just a matter of money or property, it was a matter of respect, of recognition. I had spent years making sure I could stand on my own, but this was about ensuring that my family would never again dismiss me or my son. I had always known that they didn't respect my choices. They didn't think I had the strength to succeed without their help. They didn't understand that my refusal to rely on them wasn't a weakness, it was my strength. But now I had the chance to make a statement that would speak louder than words, louder than any argument or disagreement. It was time to take control. The legal battle was intense, but I was prepared. I had kept meticulous records over the years, documenting every rejection, every harsh word, every moment where they turned their backs on me. My lawyer, who had been with me through thick and thin, knew this was more than just a case. It was personal. He could see how deeply their actions had affected me and how determined I was to make them understand the cost of their rejection. The case wasn't easy. It took months of gathering evidence, meeting with experts, and preparing my arguments. But I had something they didn't expect: the truth. I wasn't asking for anything extravagant. I wasn't looking to punish them in some dramatic way. I just wanted them to understand the consequences of their actions. I wanted them to see how their dismissal of me had shaped my life, and how it had affected my son. When the day finally came to present the case, I could feel the tension in the air. The courtroom was packed, and as I took my seat, I couldn't help but feel a sense of calm wash over me. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was a chance for me to speak my truth, to stand up for everything I had worked for everything my son deserved. I wasn't just going to win this case. I was going to show my family the strength that they had failed to see in me all those years ago. As the trial unfolded, my family tried to defend themselves, but it was clear that they couldn't deny the facts. They couldn't deny the pain they had caused, the way they had pushed me to the brink and left me to fend for myself. They tried to justify their actions, but their words were empty. They couldn't hide behind their excuses anymore. The evidence was overwhelming, and the truth was undeniable. I stood strong as I spoke, my voice steady as I explained how their rejection had affected not only me but also my son. I didn't blame them for everything. After all, we all have our flaws and mistakes, but I made sure they understood that their decisions had consequences. I didn't want them to feel sorry for me. I didn't need their pity. What I needed was for them to acknowledge the pain they had caused and the strength it had taken for me to rise above it. When the judge delivered the verdict, I could see the impact it had on my family. The looks on their faces said it all. They hadn't expected this. They hadn't expected me to fight back, and they certainly hadn't expected me to walk away from this stronger than ever. But the real moment of reckoning came when my son stepped forward. The judge had asked for a final statement, and my son, who had been sitting quietly through the entire trial, stood up. His presence was commanding, and as he spoke, I could feel the weight of his words. "I know my mother, and I know how much she has fought for me," he said, his voice clear and confident. "I may be young, but I've seen her go through more than most people ever will, and I stand by her always." In that moment, I realized that this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about us. This was about the legacy I was leaving behind, the future I was building for my son. It wasn't about revenge or bitterness. It was about giving him a life where he would never have to experience the pain I had endured. As the case concluded and the gavel came down, I knew that I had won more than just a legal battle. I had reclaimed my dignity. I had reclaimed my power, and I had ensured that my son would never have to face the same rejection I did. The family that had once dismissed me, that had once written me off, now had no choice but to see me for who I truly was: strong, capable, and unstoppable. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. There were still many challenges to face, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had taken control of my destiny. And as I walked out of the courtroom, side by side with my son, I knew that no matter what came next, we were ready. We had already overcome the hardest part, the part where they thought we would fail. The victory in court felt like a breath of fresh air, but as time passed, I realized that it wasn't just my family who had to reckon with the past. It was a matter of their complete collapse in the face of reality. The life they had built on judgments, rejection, and assumptions about me and my son was crumbling in front of them. And while I didn't take pleasure in their suffering, I couldn't deny that it was a direct consequence of their actions. First came the material collapse. They had always prided themselves on their wealth and status, on the power they thought they held over others. But after the court case, things began to fall apart. The social circles they had so carefully curated started to fall away. People who had once supported them started pulling back, whispering about their hypocrisy. Their reputation, once untouchable, was now tarnished. It was as if the walls they had built to separate themselves from the world of real struggle were beginning to crack, exposing them for what they had been all along. People who thought their wealth and privilege made them immune to consequences. Then came the collapse of their honor. The pride they had once held so high was now shattered. They couldn't hide the fact that they had been wrong. The shame was evident on their faces when they saw my son succeed, when they realized that they had misjudged me all those years ago. And as their honor began to disintegrate, their arrogance and pride faded away. For the first time, they understood what it was like to feel small, to feel insignificant. They saw that I had not only survived their rejection but had thrived, built something of my own, something that they would never be able to take away from me. And then came the collapse of their spirit. They were left to live in the aftermath of their decisions, and there was no escaping the weight of it. My mother, who had once told me I wasn't worthy of love, now sat in silence, unable to speak or defend herself. My father, who had cast me aside, was forced to confront the fact that he had lost his family, and there was nothing he could do to get it back. They had to live with the knowledge that their actions had led to this, had led to the loss of what could have been a relationship with me, with my son. In the end, there was no escaping the consequences. No amount of money, no amount of pride could shield them from the reality of their choices. They had lost everything that truly mattered, their family, their dignity, their honor. And as I stood there, watching it all crumble, I realized that their collapse wasn't just about their mistakes. It was the result of their refusal to see me for who I was. They had failed to understand that the true strength was not in wealth or status, but in resilience and love. And as I walked away from it all, I knew that I had not only rebuilt my life, I had built something that could never be taken away from me. And that was the greatest victory of all. As I watched my family crumble, there was no satisfaction in their downfall, no triumph, no gloating. I had never set out for revenge, I had only wanted to show them what they failed to see. But in the end, it wasn't about them. It was about me and my son, about the journey we had taken together. I had poured everything into raising him right, into making sure that the pain of the past didn't define our future. And seeing him now, standing tall, proud of who he was, the man he was becoming, it was the reward I had always wanted. Not the money, not the acknowledgement from my family. It was his success, his happiness that mattered. I turned my attention to giving back. With everything I had learned through my struggles, I started mentoring other single parents, other women who felt invisible. I helped them find their voice, their strength, just as I had found mine. I used my story not as a way to gain sympathy, but to show others that no matter how dark things get, there's always a way out. That you can rise no matter the odds. And while my family remained estranged, I had something they would never have: peace. Peace in knowing that the choices I made, the sacrifices I made, were for the right reasons. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about thriving, about living a life that was true to myself and my son. The lessons we had learned would stay with us forever, and that was the legacy I wanted to leave behind, one of strength, love, and resilience.